My name's Hayward Zwirling. I'm retired about 2 years from a career as a physician and a software developer. When I went into retirement, the first thing I did, being trained as a physician in academia, as an engineer before that, I said to myself, well, what do I need to do to have a happy, healthy, and fulfilling retirement? And I decided to dig into the medical literature. And ultimately, I reviewed probably 100 articles and basically came up with this syllabus called Designing Your Retirement. All the articles that are chose are articles that are designed to get me to either a happy, healthy, or fulfilling retirement. So everybody has a superpower, and my superpower is that I'm very good about organizing disparate information, pulling it together, and making it make sense as a body. And that's what you're going to see. So this is going to be our agenda. The first step is to create what's called the strategic retirement plan. And this is going to be a list of 6 objectives that are based on medical articles or scientific articles that ultimately lead either to a happy, healthy, or fulfilling retirement. After we create the evidence-based strategic retirement plan, we're going to supplement that with our personal preferences, and that'll give what I call my strategic retirement plan. And when you do this, the strategic retirement plan at the top will be the same because it's based on evidence that's broadly applicable, but then your personal preferences will be different. After we create that, we have I have my strategic retirement plan. Then I'm going to create what I call my tactical retirement plan, which is what am I going to do to make each of the objectives on my strategic retirement plan happen? And then at the end, if we'll brainstorm together. When I retired, the first thing I sort of did was I looked at the life expectancy calculator, and I have about 1.5 or 2 decades, maybe 2.5 decades of life ahead of me. It's like, okay, I need to start researching what am I going to do? And the first thing I stumbled upon, stages of retirement. This I would call, this is not hard science. There's stage one retirement, which is basically an extended vacation. And everybody is thrilled when they get to that first day or first week, first month, can do exactly what they want, completely stress-free without any other responsibilities that they had professionally. Then what happens is sometime later, 6 months, a year or two, people who are retired start to get bored with the fact that they have nothing to do. So you had pre-retirement where your schedule is completely full and you don't have time to get a cup of coffee, and post-retirement, all of a sudden you wake up in the morning and you have nothing to do and you got to fill the day. That's stage two. In addition, in stage two, certain people will start to feel a loss of a sense of power. Those in positions of authority all of a sudden discover that they are just one of many people, and there's nothing unique about them that makes them more prominent in the world than anybody else. The other thing that happens in men is that men tend to lose many of their friends when they retire because male friendships are different than female friendships. And a lot of male friendships turn out to be related to work, and those go by the wayside. So that's stage two. Stage three is prototyping, where people start to explore what am I going to do so I'm not bored and I have a fulfilling life. And then stage four, those people who actually figure out a new purpose in life we move into a new stage where they wake up in the morning and they have a reason to move forward in the day. Not everybody goes through them in that order. The length of time people stay in them is different. Some people can just start with stage one and stage three at the same time. There are multiple ways of moving through this. And maybe some people go directly from their professional career to their stage four because they already know exactly what they're going to do when they retire. So the first study is the Harvard study of adult development. And this is a remarkable trial. This started back in 1938. Grant, who was one of the original investigators, recruited sophomores from Harvard and said they're going to interview them and do exams on them every couple of years for the rest of their life. At the same time, there was another study going on out of Harvard Law School. Harvard Law professors were trying to understand why it is that some low income students weren't ending up in legal trouble compared to other low income students. And they just recruited 456 white kids who came from disadvantaged low income backgrounds and said, we're going to follow you as well. These two populations got merged. So now you have an elite population of Harvard sophomores, and you have a disadvantaged population. The study on the low income students were all white. So that became the basis of the Harvard study of adult development. Since then, spouses have been added to it, the study, and the second generation has been added to it. Study asked the question, what makes people happy? And the number one thing that came up in the study over and over again was meaningful social relationships. That's what made people the happiest. Um, Totally unexpectedly, in addition, that having many meaningful social relationships also correlated with better health and longevity. The study also found that having a sense of purpose and meaning in life correlated with happiness, and physical activity as well correlated with happiness. So there have been many other studies that have found the same thing. This study was a 34-year-old study, and it also found that happiness correlated with social relationships. In this particular study, what they found was that they didn't ask for meaningful social relationships. It turns out people correlated with marriage and being married. And to me, that's sort of a surrogate of meaningful social relationships. But they found that depending upon how many interactions you had with friends, neighbors, and relatives, that correlated with happiness when they broke the group down by the most happy and the least happy. The survey also found that happiness correlated with social activities, religious activities, community activities, reading a newspaper, and correlated negatively with watching television. I neglected to mention the studies that I picked out were mostly either systematic reviews or meta-analysis. Meaningful social relationships makes people happy, helps them live longer. From the Harvard study, about 20% of people who retire ultimately return to work. The reason was that they missed the people from work. Male friendships and female friendships are fundamentally different. 68% of friendships are the same gender. In the female to female friendships, those are referred to as face to face friendships. Those are women who get together and they sit down and they exchange meaningful, emotionally filled content and information. So there's a really exchange of information that's very meaningful. Male friendships are more side by side or utilitarian. People work next to each other at work. They'll watch a sports game together. There's less meaningful information that's passed back and forth. And as a result of that, the male friendships tend to be less durable. And in a study that came out in May 2021 from the American Perspective Survey, when they asked the question, are you very satisfied or completely satisfied with the number of friends? Women, 54% said yes. Men, it was only 48%. The male friendships clearly drop off with retirement. And then this turns out to be problematic because now when the women socialize, the man doesn't have a social circle or has a limited social circle. So he tags along with the woman, and that basically changes the dynamics of the woman's social circle, and that becomes a problem. Meaningful social relationships are important. They have multiple benefits, and men tend to lose more of their meaningful social relationships than women on retirement. These are some of the other benefits that turned out to come from various studies about meaningful social relationships. Lower levels of depression, greater sense of purpose, higher levels of what are considered desirable personality traits, improved memory, executive function, which is thinking, better language development, and better health. And so there are multiple studies that are showing the same thing. Some people usually ask me what matters in terms of meaningful social relationships. Is it the quality of social relationships that matter, or is it the quantity? It turns out statistically they both matter, but if you only had to choose one, quality matters more than quantity. The graph on the left shows hours per day you're doing various different activities and what you're doing. And the blue line along the top shows that the amount of time you spend alone increases significantly about middle age or the latter half of middle age. The data on the right are several international studies measuring loneliness. This line here is the average, the one that has a gray background. Teenagers are the most lonely. Midlife, we get to be less lonely. And then as we get older, we get lonely, more lonely. It's important to define a little bit of terminology. Loneliness is a feeling, a sense of a lack of meaningful social interactions. Being alone doesn't mean you're lonely. Now, most of the studies in most people show that being alone excessively does lead to loneliness. But there's a small segment of the population from a National Academy of Science study that shows that there's some people who are alone but don't feel lonely. I just did this long cross country drive from Boston to San Francisco and back, 7,200 miles with my two dogs, and had lots of time to think. And ultimately, I decided about myself that being alone doesn't make me lonely. Most people, they find that if they're alone excessively, they feel lonely. But so being alone usually correlates with loneliness, but not always. One of the things that I was trying to tease out is, remember, I said before, men tend to lose their social relationships when they retire. And I was looking for data to really sort of prove that. And there really isn't any good data. There were two big studies that came out in 2020. One was called Loneliness Around the World, and it said loneliness was much more of a significant problem for men than women. At the same time, the National Academy of Science did a study on loneliness, and they basically said loneliness rates are similar for male and female. So I don't know what the reality is. And it was in the National Academy of Science study, which found that subset of people who are alone but don't feel lonely. But most people, when they're alone excessively, feel lonely. So Kurt Vonnegut gave a talk at SUNY Fredonia for graduation, and in paraphrasing it, we were meant to live in extended families. Do what you can to get yourselves extended families, no matter how arbitrary they may be. They do not have to be high-grade people either. They can be imbeciles. What matters is numbers. Some of you are going to be asking yourself, what is the quality of my meaningful social relationships? And I don't have time to go through all of this, but the reference at the bottom in yellow, The Good Life, is a book by the two principal investigators of the Harvard Longevity Study. And they have questionnaires that you can do for yourself so you can assess it yourself. So we're going to go back. So remember in the beginning, I said we're going to create a strategic retirement plan. What are the things we need to do, or what objectives do we need to prioritize so we have a happy, healthy, and fulfilling retirement? Well, the first thing is we should increase the number or augment the quality or number of our meaningful social relationships. I didn't show you all the data, but besides happiness, there's improvement in cognitive health, mental health, physical health, longevity, and it also creates a sense of fulfillment. So that'll be the first objective on our strategic retirement plan. So we're going to change gears and now talk about meaning and purpose. But first, we have to define that. Everybody's heard of this, that you need to have a meaning and purpose in life. And the Harvard study found that that correlated with happiness. The definition of having a meaning and purpose in life is not well defined. If you can go back to Aristotle and Plato, they came up with a definition, interpreted it as developing a good character, fulfill our nature as rational beings in the pursuit of knowledge and virtue. Others have said it requires a sense of sacrifice. Others say it doesn't. After reading multiple articles about this, I've come to the sense that having a meaning and purpose in life is something that people have to define for themselves. And the definition that I use is the individual believes they have lived a life which meets their own expectations, what they've done has meaning, and gives them a reason to look forward to tomorrow, purpose. You don't have to be a saint, though, to have meaning and purpose in life. I mean, you might be a bank robber and you say, well, my meaning and purpose in life is to make me as rich as possible. I've been successful as a bank robber so far. I'm going to keep doing this. So for them, they may say, yeah, I got meaning and purpose in life. You got to come up with your own definition. But this is the one I like. Now, in this study, which was a big study, they started out with healthy people between the ages of 50 and 60. There were 7,000 people in the study. At the beginning of the study, they did a survey, a purpose in life, a rating. And then they stratified them into quintiles. And then they just followed them and see who was alive months and years later. And so the study went out about 5 years. And this is what's called a Kaplan-Meier curve, and it's a survival curve. At the beginning, it's time zero, 100% are alive, and with time, people just die off. And what they found is those people who had the highest rating of life purpose lived longer than those with the lowest. And to me, this was a remarkable finding. I mean, it never would have occurred to me that something like this would happen. Having a sense of purpose in life increases your survival. And there are other studies that show that people who have a sense of purpose in life, when they get disease, they manage the disease process better. For the second objective on our strategic retirement. We're going to add meaning and purpose in life because there are benefits from happiness, mental health, heart health, cardiovascular health, longevity, and a sense of fulfillment. So that's the second objective. Next, we're going to talk about physical activity and happiness. And there's a lot of data on this. This was a systematic review of the relationship between physical activity and happiness, included 23 studies. My sense in a lot of the social science literature is there is uh, a strong belief that physical activity augments happiness. But in the randomized trials, which are a more definitive trial, suggested that exercise improved happiness. Suggested is not really a high quality or definitive assessment. So this is a typical trial, and there are multiple trials like this. In this trial, there were three groups. There was a group that was going to the gym regularly. There was a group that was just enrolled to go to the gym regularly. And there's a third group that watched TV all the time. And at the baseline, they did an assessment of their happiness. And then they did the surveys at 4 weeks later and 8 weeks later. And what they found was that the more exercise you did, and the more intense the exercise, your happiness correlated with increased intensity and duration of exercise. And there are lots of studies that look like this. But the social science literature, to me, is not the same quality as the hard science literature. After reading all the articles, I'm reasonably certain that there is enough data to allow me to conclude exercise makes a person happier. But I'm not going to tell you that there isn't going to be a study somewhere down the road that definitively proves that that association is non existent. More exercise is better, more intense exercise is better, and more frequent exercise. So duration, intensity, and frequency, more the better. So there's also a lot of data about physical activity and longevity. I'm just going to skim over it. The PDF that is available online will have some interesting graphs that you can look at where you can say, okay, this is where I am on the graph. And if I change certain habits, this is what's going to happen. So in this study, which is a big study, they define what are called healthy risk factors or low risk factors. Never smoking, not overweight, exercising a lot, not too much alcohol, and a high quality diet. And what they found is that at the age of 50, if you compared the person who did all of the healthy habits versus the person who did none of the healthy habits, you would live about 13 years longer. It turns out all that extra life is going to spend on the treadmill. But we've already seen physical activity, there's other benefits. So this is a sort of example of some of the data that you can drill down on yourself. These lines are based on the amount of activity you're getting, exercise you're getting on a regular basis. So 70, no exercise. If you start to exercise, say 2 hours a week, you can expect to live about 2 years longer. So you can pick out where you are on this curve. And so you can see the effect. On the next one, see the effect of adopting one healthy habit, two healthy habits, three, four, or five healthy habits at any given age. So let's say you have all of the bad habits, you're age 65. If you say, okay, I'm just going to stop smoking, I'm going to live about 2 years longer. On the other hand, if I do all those other things, I'm going to live about 10 or 11 years longer. If you're a male, and the numbers for women are on the other side. What I just said is a little bit disingenuous. Nobody has done the study, or at least I haven't seen a study that actually did what I just proposed. There was data that came out that if you stop smoking for 13 years, your risk of lung cancer was basically the same as if you never smoked, but it needed that long run in. So I can't really tell you that if you start exercising at the age of 70, you're definitely going to live, 2 years longer than otherwise. But it's intriguing data. And this is the data based on individual bad habits. And what's the probability of surviving to age 90, starting at age 70, based on these risk factors? So, for example, if you do all the right things, you have no adverse risk factors here, there's a 50, and you're healthy at age 70, there's a 54% chance you're going to make it to age 90. Conversely, if you got all these bad habits, there's only a 4% chance. nurses' health study, but it's basically the same thing. Exercise increases longevity, but in this study, the conclusion was it's never too late to begin exercising. Any exercise program you start at any age is better than not starting it. And in the women's health study, what they found is that exercising not only improves longevity, but increases the likelihood that you're going to be healthier in old age. And I mentioned earlier this disability free longevity calculator. You can look at your age here, what risk factors you have, and basically see how many years you have before you develop a disability. The way this study defined disability was problems managing money, using the bathroom, making phone calls, shopping, getting out of bed, showering, dressing, using a map, problems feeding yourself, taking medicines, walking across the room, or preparing a hot meal. Those are all considered disabilities. And I just saw an article that talked about if you are having problems managing money, that's actually a warning sign about getting dementia later in life. So anyway, you can come back and sort of see where you fit on this. The next thing we're going to talk about is physical activity and neuroplasticity. So neuroplasticity is the ability of the brain to modify itself in response to learning, injury, and experience. By modify, I mean you create new nerve cells, the neurons, you create new connections between the nerves, or you improve the blood supply. It turns out the brain is like muscles and bones. In both of those situations, we know you exercise, the muscles get stronger, the bones get stronger. Well, it turns out the brain does the same thing. And that's called neuroplasticity. And this is a well documented science. And there are changes in the brain that have been documented in people in response to physical activity. There's an increased amount of gray matter. There is certain hormones that tend to be beneficial to brain structure, and there's an increased blood flow to the brain. This was a large study, 160 articles, a systematic review. Besides finding these structural and functional changes, they also tried to correlate that back with all these psychological benefits, reduction in anxiety, depression, and try to tie in any of these improvements with changes in brain structure or function. I thought that the author seemed to be trying to prove that exercise has a clear benefit, and they're trying to tie in a hard science mechanism. And I thought that this was really weak. But it's there, and there was a lot of articles, so I wouldn't discount it. You're going to see some other articles later that I think are really strong, tying in physiology and psychology that are really very cool. Physical activity increases neuroplasticity in the brain, and that has a lot of benefits. So I want to segue a little bit to being out in nature, and then we'll circle back to exercise. This was a huge meta-analysis, 143 studies, 100 health outcomes, and what they found is just being out in nature, walking in a park regularly, lowered your blood pressure, your heart rate, salivary cortisols, which is a measure of stress hormones, plus a reduction in diabetes, heart disease, overall death rate, with other benefits seen as well. And the conclusion of this study was a preponderance of evidence has shown that exposure to the great outdoors has mental health and physical health benefits. So we talked about exercise being good. Now we know being out in nature being good. If you're going to exercise, is it better to exercise indoors, outdoors in an urban environment, or outdoors in green space? And then there were multiple studies done about this. The one that I liked the best came out of Stanford. One group they sent to hike through the Stanford plantations, it's a green space. The other were told to walk down a main thoroughfare through Stanford and then come back. When they came back, they did brain scans on them and psychological surveys. And those who went into the green space had more benefits than those who walked down the thoroughfare. And in a sense, it's not surprising. Walking down a thoroughfare can be stressful, and we're going to talk later about some of these stress hormones and the adverse effects. And being out in a green space is much less stressful. So the conclusion of all of these studies was not exercising is unhealthy. It's better to exercise indoors. It's better still to exercise outdoors in an urban setting. And if you have a choice, do your exercise under a canopy of trees. Evidence show that outdoor activity in nature improves mental health more than outdoor activity in an urban environment. do need to touch a little bit about cognitive function dementia. Anybody who's dealt with anybody who's had dementia, as family members have probably been told that exercise is good to prevent or slow down the deterioration in dementia. It turns out there really isn't data to prove that. These are two studies that try to look at that. And again, you have to look closely at the words. This prospective study, late adult, it supports the plausibility that physical activity slows memory loss. Well, supports the plausibility is it's not. I mean, that's not that doesn't that's not overwhelmingly convincing. Second study, findings suggest almost any physical activity might have a positive impact on maintenance improvement of cognitive function. None of the guidelines say exercise prevents the progression or slows the deterioration that's going to happen. A lot of this is a little bit nuanced because we talk about people who have normal mental health, people who have what's called mild cognitive impairment, which is a slight decrease in mental health function, and people who have dementia. So there's sort of a spectrum. And when a person crosses from normal to mild cognitive impairment to dementia, it's not rocket science. All right, it's very much clinical science. The percentage of people diagnosed with mild cognitive impairment is reasonably constant through life. Percent of the people with dementia, by the time you get to 90, almost over a third have dementia, have been diagnosed with dementia. And that doesn't count the people who haven't even been diagnosed, because there are many that haven't. There are some things you can do to reduce your risk of dementia. This was a big study that I liked, which looked at cognitive activities. And it was a study of 10,000 Australian seniors, 98% were white, followed for 10 years. And what it found was that critical thinking, logical reasoning, and social interaction decreased the risk of dementia. But we're not talking about a huge decrease. 7 to 11% is not a big number. So engaging in social activities, I mean, in cognitive activities is important. This was an interesting study, came out of Lancet, and the study originally came out in 2020. This is the updated version, 2024, that just came out. And what they attempted to do was define what are the risk factors for getting dementia. Um, and less. So I'm not going to read through all of them, but the ones that are important that you should is untreated hearing loss, untreated vision loss. All right. So there's a huge stigma for people wearing hearing aids. Um, we now know that if people have decreased hearing and they wear a hearing aid, they're less likely to get dementia. So hearing aid should be, everybody. If you're saying what a lot to the conversations, get your hearing tested because this can make a real difference. On the right hand side, population attributable risk is if you eliminated this problem, what percentage? What's the total reduction in the people who have dementia in the population? So hearing loss, if everybody got a hearing aid who needed it, we have 7% less people who have dementia. Many of these are treatable. Not all of them. For example, less education. Well, that's something that's early in life. Traumatic brain injury, it's already happened. But a lot of these are treatable. So this is the last slide I have about dementia. As of 2024, there is no cure to stop or reverse the progression of the disease once you've been diagnosed with it. Nevertheless, there are treatable risk factors that we went through. Engaging in cognitive activities is helpful. I still tell people that they should be exercising. And what I tell them is the guidelines are 150 minutes of exercise a week. But it turns out it doesn't matter how you break it up. The benefits are the same as long as it adds up to 150 minutes a week. So you can exercise 75 minutes twice a week, 50 minutes 3 times a week, 30 minutes 5 times a week, 22 minutes daily, 11 minutes in the morning, 11 minutes at night. It doesn't matter how you break it up. Exercise is good. Longer is better. More vigorous is better. And it's never too late to begin. We're going to add physical activity to our strategic retirement plan because there's improvement in happiness, cognitive health, mental health, physical activity, longevity, and fulfillment. Next, we're going to move on to volunteering. There's lots of data on this, and the this review is 28 articles focusing on mostly older adults, and the conclusion was there's robust data across many clinical studies. Volunteering has beneficial impacts: mortality, disability, happiness, quality of life, depression, having a sense of purpose, being physically active, and social connectedness. And the data is really, really robust on the benefits of volunteering. I need to talk about this caveat about volunteering. It turns out volunteering only has all these benefits if the volunteering is done altruistically. Initially, when I saw that, it's like, well, why is that? When you're doing something that you feel is really good, your stress level goes down, your stress hormones go down, and that has a favorable impact on the body. If you're doing volunteering because your spouse says you got to go work in the soup kitchen for 2 hours, the person who's doing that is going to be counting the minutes. It's not going to be any form of stress relaxation. And there, maybe it is even going to boost the level of stress. So it wouldn't have the benefits that they want. As people get older, uh, DNA gets methylated. So you can basically age a person based on how much CH3 is attached to their DNA. And it turns out when they looked at their DNA age compared to people who didn't, the people who did the volunteering, their DNA for the same chronologic age looked younger. Volunteering is the fourth thing we're going to add, but it needs to be altruistic volunteering. Next thing we're going to talk about is income. In 2010, these two Nobel laureates published a study. Daniel Kahneman, who died recently, was at Princeton. What they found was that as you earned, if you started for somebody who had zero income and you measure their happiness, as their income rose to $75,000, they got happier and happier and happier. Once they got to $75,000, increasing the income above that level didn't make them happier still. And that was the dogma in all the happiness literature and is out there now. And you listen to any talk, they'll say money doesn't make you happy as long as your basic needs are met. Then there was a second study done. The second one was also by a guy, Killingsworth, who was at Princeton as well. And what he found in his study was there was no threshold. The more money you made, the happier you were. In a remarkable symbiosis of what's supposed to happen in academia, Killingsworth and Kahneman from the first study got together, brought in another academic, and pooled their data, trying to figure out why did we get different studies. And what they found is if you divide the population into quintiles based on happiness at the beginning of the study, okay, the least happy group, average happy, and people who are just ebullient all the time or are happy all the time. In the people who are the least happy group, as the income increases to $100,000, and it turns out $100,000 in 2022, 2023 was the same as 75,000 previously. As the income goes up, people got happier in this least happy, in this most miserable group of people. Once their income met all their basic needs, further increasing income really didn't materially increase their happiness. Conversely, in everybody else, the happiness went up the more money you got. And the people who were in the most happy group, as their income went up, they got happier than everybody else for the same incremental increase in money. And the way I look at this is the brain has a set point. It's sort of like a dial on your phones for volume about how much, when a signal comes in, how much the signal is going to get boosted. And people in the most happy group, this is set up really high. So small increases in income makes them really a whole lot more happy. This other group, it didn't matter. Once their basic needs were met, they just were not going to be more happy because this is their biology. Basically, more money makes you happier. Okay. The question is, how do you spend your money to maximize your happiness? And there are two types of happiness. One's called hedonic happiness, which is sort of happiness in the moment. You're riding a motorcycle or a bike real fast, and the wind's in your face, and it's cool. The other is called eudaimonic happiness, which is happiness of a longer duration. You're preparing a meal for Thanksgiving for a big family get together. When people buy something new, you get a new car, there's a hedonic happiness. Immediately, you like the new car, you like the cell phone, whatever it is. But with time, that happiness wears off. A year after I bought my new car, it was better than what I had before, but basically it was just a car. And same with cell phones and so forth. That's called hedonic adaptation. You buy something new, you get really happy in the beginning, but it wears off. If you put your money into buying experiences, doing a trip together, going to a museum, doing something, that happiness doesn't wear off. And when people reflect back on the event, the vacation that they had, it sort of brings back that sense of happiness. Spend your money on experiences, not objects, because the experiences become more happy with time. You look back at photographs. I look at photographs of my kids when they were young, and it brings a sense of joy. Shared experiences turn out to make people more happy than individual experiences. So you should do things with others. Engaging in physical activity or mentally challenging activities increases happiness, social interactions. And if you have enough disposable income, spend your money to acquire more free time. Get somebody to clean your house or clean your car or whatever it is, so that you could spend your time on stuff that really makes you happy, such as more social activities. If you're going to spend your money on other people, spend it on face-to-face interactions, family, and spend it on family and friends. And if you're going to spend it on charities, make sure it's something that you really think is going to make a difference. If you're giving to a charity because you feel guilty, that's not probably going to make you really happier. Get off the hedonic treadmill, that process of buying something and then a year later you get a new iPhone, a year later you get another one, and so forth. The next thing I'm going to add is invest your money that's going to make you happier. So we need to talk a little bit about happiness. And I'm not going to spend too much time on this because I want to wrap up this section. There, happiness is broken down by the social sciences into three components: enjoyment, satisfaction, and meaning. Meaning, we've already talked about. Satisfaction is what you have divided by what you want. So you can increase your satisfaction by getting more stuff, but that's going to wear off. That's that hedonic happiness. Or you can decide you really want less. Enjoyment has these different components: pleasure, which is basically happiness in the moment, such as skiing down the mountain, and then appreciation and knowledge, which is a more in depth, a longer form of happiness, such as going to a museum, but you already know something about the artist, or go and listen to music or something like that. Second thing to know is happiness. Is partly genetics. From the twin studies, about half of our happiness is determined by our genetics. About a quarter is circumstances, where we live and how healthy our kids are and stuff that are really out of our control. And only about one quarter, which is the only segment that's really under our control, is our habits. So this is a graph of happiness over a lifetime. If we look at the dotted blue line, age is on the x-axis and happiness score is on the y-axis. When you're 18, you're very happy. By the time you finish college, you're less happy. You're moving into the work world, and then happiness uh, tends to rise. 36, late middle life, the happiness tends to fall, which sort of correlates with midlife crisis. And then after you retire, happiness gets better for the rest of your life. There are confounding variables. In the US, things that we know that affect happiness are education, marital status, and employment. The statisticians can take out the effects of that. And when they do, they get this U-shaped curve. Now, the reason that's important is you want to compare this U-shaped curve to happiness scores in other cultures around the world. And when they do the same experiment and take out their confounding variables, which are different than ours, everywhere around the world, they get the U-shaped curve. And when they look at happiness curves at animals in the zoo, so the zookeepers rate the level of happiness on a regular basis. Is the hippopotamus happy? Is the monkeys happy? And so forth. They get low point midlife and high point at the end. So it's almost as if this U-shaped curve of happiness is an inherent part of our biology. The human brain has an inherent negativity bias. We reserve more of our brain structure for remembering bad things than good things. And there's an evolutionary advantage to this. When our brains were forming, imagine you're in the plains of Africa, you're walking up a hill, you know there is a patch of blueberries on the other side. And as you get to the top of the hill, let's say you have a negativity bias. It's like, okay, I got to be cautious. I don't know if there's a lion on the other side. I don't know if the other tribe is over there. And you sort of slowly peek over the other side before you go get the blueberries. If you had a positivity bias, as you got closer and closer, you're going to run faster and faster. It's like, I'm almost here, almost there. And you run right into the mouth of the lion. So if you want to pass on your genes, having a negativity bias turned out to be an evolutionary advantage. The problem is in our society now, that carries over to how our brains work today. I want to show you this study. This is such a cool study. So I talked about before the link between biology and how we feel. Remember I said there are two types of happiness. There's hedonic happiness and eudaimonic happiness. And the hedonic happiness is basically happiness in the moment. And these people tend to be call themselves I'm a taker, present oriented. I want to be happy right now. People who will score high on the eudaimonic happiness, um, they're a giver. They're thinking more about what happened in the past, what's going to happen in the future. And the classic example would be preparing a Thanksgiving dinner. To them, that's happiness. That's eudaimonic happiness. Everybody has both. And most people have, if when they rate these levels of happiness, most people have more hedonic happiness, score higher on the hedonic happiness than eudaimonic happiness. But everybody has both, and one isn't better than the other. They're just different forms of happiness, and people have different ratios. In this study, they did a psychological study on patients, and they've broken down into people who measure really high on the hedonic happiness and high on the eudaimonic happiness. And they looked at their genes. And it turns out there's a group of genes called CTRA. And when these genes are very active, it's associated with adverse health effects. It's associated with more inflammation, higher rates of cancer, higher rates of infection. When people scored high on the hedonic happiness, their CTRA genes were much more active, whereas people who scored high in the eudaimonic happiness, this group of genes scored lower. So the people who scored high in the hedonic happiness, you would expect from their gene activity to be less healthy, and eudaimonic happiness would be more healthy. But I thought that this was really cool. So, in the field of happiness research, um, there's something called the hope circuit, and this has been proven in rats that by thinking positive thoughts, you can decrease the influence of negative situations or influence on your psyche. Opposite signal strategy: when bad things happen, what you want to do is redirect your bad habits into healthful habits. So let's say you have a bad habit drinking too much regular soda. Well, instead of when you reach for the soda, force yourself to go for a walk out in nature. That would be an example of opposite signal strategy. Disputation strategy is the idea that when you have something bad happen, people tend to magnify the negative aspects. You have to, if you consciously are aware of it, using that hope circuit, you can say, yes, this bad thing has happened to me today, but the reality is, a week from now, this is going to be behind me and I'll be okay. Other things you can do in terms of hacking your brain to make you happier is a gratitude journal. I think a lot of people are doing this. I didn't talk about oxytocin. Oxytocin is a hormone the brain makes, which makes us happier. Looking into the eyes of your dog will make you happier. Getting a hug. There are things you can do to increase your oxytocin levels. I don't have time to go into these latter two, but these are all things that you can do that's going to make you happier. And they're all detailed in my syllabus. So the last thing we're going to add is hack your brain to augment happiness. And that'll improve your mental health and your level of happiness. So these are the hard science things that you can do. I do want to mention the caveat, and the caveat is that these studies are done mostly on probably middle class people. I don't know if the same data would turn out if this was done in a low income, high stress community. I don't know. And the second thing is just because there's a correlation doesn't mean that the correlation implies causality. For example, there's a correlation between eating ice cream and drowning deaths. Okay. That doesn't mean eating ice cream causes you to drown. The correlation happens because they both occur in the summer and people go to the beach in the summer. So there are more drowns in the summer, but there's also more ice cream. So just because there's a correlation doesn't mean there's a cause and effect. So what we talked about this strategic retirement plan, those six things. Now I'm going to add my personal objectives. So I create my strategic retirement plan. The first six things that we already went through are in the scientific literature. Now this is subjective. And what I did is when I retired, I started to keep an online diary. And then I started writing articles about retirement and my retirement experience. And I'd look back at these things that I entered previously and discovered there were some patterns. And for me, a good day would be some form of meaningful social reaction, some form of exercise, learning something new, an absence of stressful activities, creating, making, or repairing something, and a desire to explore the secular spiritual world. I come from a very quantitative background. There's clearly another part of the world that I had not experienced, which has been around since the beginning. There's something there that I'm missing, and I wanted to experience that. So now I have my strategic plan, the original six plus these last four. Intellectual activities, avoid stressless activities, engage in creative activities, and explore secular spiritual world. Daniel Gilbert, he's a psychologist at Harvard who's very well known. Human beings are works in progress that mistakenly think they're finished. The one constant in our life is change. And I can tell that I've actually changed in my retirement. I created my strategic retirement plan, six evidence-based objectives, four personal objectives. Of course, if you do this, you may not have four personal objectives, you could have 20. The only thing I would tell you is these objectives aren't specific things like I want to visit Paris. These are broad things like, travel is important to me. So now I want to tell you how I implemented my strategic retirement plan. What I did is for these 10 items on my strategic retirement plan, I created 10 tactical plans. So the first thing on my strategic retirement plan was augment the number of meaningful social relations. And these are the things that I had tried over time. When I retired, I started to go to the Somerville Council on the Aging, the men's monthly talk group, and on weekly walks with with a group of seniors. I stopped doing both of those because it wasn't helping me move forward on my meaningful social relationships. I created a monthly, what I call a REM brunch group, Retired Elderly Men's Brunch. We meet once a month at a cafe in Davis Square. Maybe there have been five or six of us. But usually I get three people who show up. Part of the problem is two of the people have houses up in Maine or New Hampshire. One of them's got grandkids on the West Coast. So people are gone for parts of the season. It's not as much as I would like, but right now but we've been doing it for about a year. I went to grad school at MIT. So through the MIT Club of Boston, there are lots of social events and lectures that my wife and I go to. In fact, we were just at one yesterday, and we met a lot of interesting people, and we learned a lot of interesting things. I created what I call a shoot the shit salon in my backyard. So this was last summer. I have an email list of all the people in our neighborhood near Davis Square, and there are probably, I don't know, 35 people on the list. I send out an email on Wednesday saying Friday, 5:30 to 6:30, shoot the shit salon in our backyard. We will have some fruit, some nuts. If you want to bring beverages to share, fine. And we just talk for an hour. And we would get somewhere between one and maybe five people who would show up. And the conversations range from, rather unremarkable to really interesting conversations. I created a pickleball league at MIT for alumni in February and March in the depth of winter. And there were people who came, we would have between 6 and 12 people show up, but it didn't lead to additional meaningful social relations. There's a famous study entitled Mistakenly Seeking Solitude. And in this study, which has since been repeated in the social science literature, what they did was people were getting on a train, and the social scientists said to the people getting on the train, we're doing an experiment, we'd like you to partake in it. If you do, they get divided into two groups. One group are told they're going to be interviewed at the end of the train ride. The other group are told, we want you to make a point of having a conversation with a stranger that you're sitting next to on the train, and you're going to be interviewed at the end. And it turns out when they did the interviews at the end, everybody who talked to the stranger said it was a fantastic experience and they're going to make it part of their life going forward. So I make it a point of trying to talk to strangers, which I never would have done before. And Most of the time, nothing remarkable happens, but sometimes it's just an interesting conversation or I learn something. So I would encourage you to talk to strangers. David Brooks has a really nice book out called How to Know a Person. And I listened to it as an audiobook. I read it once. I outlined it. I read my outline, and it tells you how to have a meaningful conversation with other people. I have tried to change how I work to do what he said, and I just can't get myself to do change how I interact with the world. But if you want instructions on how to have meaningful conversations with people, it's a really good book. How to Know a Person. And then recently, I decided since my Rembrandts group of neighbors wasn't working, I was going to set up a rebrunch group, which I call for MIT alumni. And through the MIT Club of Boston, anybody can post an event. And I posted an event saying, I'm going to set up a monthly meeting of alumni at a particular cafe in Davis Square, limited to 10 people. We're just going to talk about life experiences, whatever comes up. And it immediately got oversubscribed. And we met once and we're scheduled to meet next Tuesday. But there clearly is a desire for people to do this. And my plan is if this survives 4 to 6 months, I'll try to set up other ones elsewhere and then I'll quickly exit. But there clearly was a desire for people to sit down and talk with other people. In the future, to try to develop more meaningful social relations, I wanted to create a play reading group. I love theater, but I don't know anything about theater or acting. And I thought it'd be cool to get a group of lay people together to just read plays. It turns out that the Cambridge Council on Aging has such a group, but they meet weekly. And I wasn't willing to commit to weekly meetings. And it was only women, which made me a little bit uncomfortable. So I didn't do it. Other things I thought about setting up a senior cycling group. When I looked into that, there are lots of cycling groups. It's a little bit more complicated than just sort of saying, okay, let's meet and go cycling. So I haven't moved that. But those are some of the things that I thought about. The thing that I did learn from more studies was in meta analysis, there's a fair amount of data about the benefit of intergenerational interactions. And many of these things were intergenerational. So if you can get into a situation where there are people of different ages, that tends to have some real benefits. Although the benefits may be small, there are some benefits. So this is still a work in progress for me. And you have to expect that there are going to be failures in your tactical plan, as I pointed out already. These are quotes from three people. I like Leonardo da Vinci's the best. And if the above effect is not obtained, waste no more time on it. Next thing on my strategic retirement plan is finding a sense of purpose and meaning. And there are things you can do to do this. First thing I would tell you is if somebody gives you an opportunity, always say yes. That should be your default position. It is not my default position, but every time somebody asks me, I try to remember just say yes. Um, because it opened up doors that weren't open before. You can try joining a volunteer club, keeping a gratitude journal. You can even Google, how do I find my purpose in life? And that will give you stuff, some insights. I mentioned my cross country drive, which definitely gave me some insights into myself. 6 days in the car by myself with two dogs. I listened to a couple of audio books. I listened to some music, but it gave me a lot of time to think, and that was real turned out to be helpful. You should also consider prototyping activities outside your comfort zone. I had previously read the book called Designing Your Life, which is written by two mechanical engineers from Stanford. They have a class there, which is apparently the most subscribed course at Stanford. And it's really designed for undergraduates to help them figure out what do they want to do in their life. But it's a methodology which basically talks about prototyping and figuring out what's important to you and how do you move forward in the world. My wife did the book, and as a result of it, one of the exercises led her to go to a class, and one thing led to another. And she basically switched from a career as a project manager in the life sciences, went to Tufts, got a certificate in museum studies, and now works for a one-person consulting firm on museum projects, helping museums design exhibits around the country. And so for me, my sense of purpose is to create something that is emotionally or intellectually uh, engaging or somehow valued by others. To me, that's not classic volunteering, but this turns out to be also my volunteer work. And it's stuff like putting together this lecture because I can tell it's of value to people. I do woodworking. Some of the stuff that I make is a little bit different. When I watch people interact with it, it's obviously a light bulb goes off in their head, and that is to me really fulfilling. So I have a frame that I made, and if you imagine a picture and then a rectangular frame around it, but the frame is skewed 30 degrees to the picture. I put it up on the wall, and there was two couples looking at it, and the spouses were sort of arguing, rotating. One said, "Well, the picture should be parallel to the floor," and the other one said, "No, the frame should be parallel." And that sort of way of looking at the world a little differently, that brought value to me. um the article, that's the article in the Globe, that's the elephant that I made. It's on the Somerville Community Path. I got so much feedback uh for that elephant, and there's two giraffes that are 20 feet tall. I will sometimes go over and just watch the kids play with these things, and when I put them up, I was worried that the city was going to arrest me. I am certain now that if the city takes them down, the mothers in the area are going to revolt, because they bring their kids there and it's entertainment for the kids. I also, so I write my blog, and in writing my blog, I will get emails back from people. And again, it's sort of like I've got people to think about something that they hadn't thought of. And I do my photography. When I did my trip out west, this is a lightning storm that happened behind the Tetons while I was there at night. And I set up my camera as a video, and then I went through and found the screenshots, which were the tenths of a second. And when I show these people the pictures, it's like, whoa, I've never seen anything like that. And it gives me a sense of like, okay, I've done something that's of value to others. Engaging physical activity. What I do for my exercise is, as long as it's over 40 degrees, I generally ride 2 hours, 3 times a week, the Minuteman Bike Trail out to Bedford and back, listening to music or a story. If I want to go fast, I listen to Tina Turner. If I don't want to go so fast, I'll listen to something else, or I'll listen to an audiobook. People who aren't exercising but are concerned that maybe about how they should exercise, the National Institute of Health has exercises online for based on your age, and tells you what you can and cannot do and shows you how to do it. The New York Times had a nice article also with there are links there. What I would tell people is, exercise is beneficial. It's not the cure all for every problem, but there's so many benefits that more exercise is better than none. Um, and no matter what you do, even if you just go for a walk, the health benefits are real. Third thing on my strategic retirement plan was participate in altruistic activities. And as I said, for me, the altruistic activities is trying to create something that has value to others. The stuff that I make, nothing gets sold. It's all just out there. And if I can get somebody to say that was really cool, I feel like I've done something. For those who are thinking of want to doing volunteer work and don't know where to go, that's a URL. You can type in the zip code and it'll give you activities that you can do in your area. But volunteering needs to be broadly defined. It's not just working in a soup kitchen. We talked about how do you invest your money? Well, I invest my money to facilitate more social interactions. Sixth thing on my strategic retirement plan was hack your brain to augment happiness. And these are some of the things that activities that I can do to make myself happier. And I do a gratitude journal. When things happen that are bad, I try to remember that I'm seeing it unnecessarily negative, and with time, I know it's going to get better. And there's a lot more on my website about all of this. The seventh thing on my strategic retirement plan was engage in intellectual activities. So this is now we move to my personal objectives. And as I mentioned before, in the Boston area, there are 1,000 things you can do for free or paid if you want to learn something. There's just no dearth of options. And online also, there are more than you can possibly ingest. I do my blogging as an intellectual activity, books. I do a lot of audiobooks. Audiobooks before 1924 are free. And there are lots of sources you can get free audiobooks. I talked about my need to avoid stressful conversations. So I want to avoid top political conversations with people who believe the world is flat. I want to avoid conversations about the healthcare system. I didn't go into why I left healthcare, but it basically became impossible for me to take care of patients in a way that met my own professional standards. And I felt I was violating everything that was important. So I decided that's it. Next thing on my strategic retirement plan was creative activities. I do my writing. I do my photography, and I do my woodworking. One of the things that's important is overcoming inertia. And this is true for both my wife and myself. And I'll bet it's true for a lot of people. A lot of times we'll be at home sitting around. It's like, okay, what should I do? You know, my woodworking shop is in my basement. She has a painting studio in her backyard, and we're just talking, doing nothing. And it's really just the inertia of getting started. And what I discovered for myself, and she's tried it and works for her, is I lower my expectations. If I'm working on a project and let's say the next phase is going to take 2 or 4 hours, okay, you're not going to spend 4 hours on it. Just go down and sweep up the shop, get it ready. So tomorrow you'll come back and do the work. Almost inevitably, after I sweep up the shop, I just pick up the tools and I start working. And she does much the same thing. She'll go out and say, well, I know I'm going to do this painting. It's going to require all this time. And she says, well, maybe I'll just go out and clean my brushes. And before you know it, she's doing painting. And 4 hours later, she pops up out of her studio. So I lower my expectations. And most of the time, that works. Exploring the secular spiritual world, I tried meditation. There was a very good class online. Masterclass is a great class about meditation given by the guy who brought secular meditation to the US. I tried it. It didn't really work. For me, my meditation is cycling. I come home from cycling under the tree canopy. I just feel great. Michael Pollan has a very interesting book, if you haven't already read it, How to Change Your Mind about hallucinogenics. I tried it once. I think the dose I used was just too low, and I'm going to come back to it. There is some cool articles, which I don't have time to go into, talking about how the brain works differently under the effects of psilocybin and not. And it turns out different parts of the brain, when you take psilocybin, start to communicate with each other, which they don't do when you're not on psilocybin. And so this is probably the mechanism of why so many things happen. Um, the deliberative scheduling. So it is very important that when you move into retirement, all of a sudden you got a lot of free time, and when you're working, you're looking for 5 minutes to go to the bathroom or get a cup of coffee. In retirement, it's exactly the opposite. So the way I do it for myself is at the beginning of every day, I've got a calendar on the kitchen table. I get a cup of coffee. I look at the calendar of what's coming on. I look at my emails, looking for lectures or other things that I might want to add to my calendar. And I'm constantly adding to the calendar. Because if I don't do that, 3 weeks from now, a month from now, there are going to be times I'm just sitting around with nothing to do. So you have to deliberately schedule things. Jerome Grootman, who's at Harvard, had a nice article in the New Yorker. He's a professor of medicine, and he talks about the science of making new habits. And what he talks about is that you can't use willpower to create new habits. You know, almost everybody who creates a New Year's resolution, it fails. He talks about how you have to create friction to make the old habit more difficult, or you have to replace a bad habit with a new habit. And for me, that friction was go down and get my cup of coffee. My calendar is staring me in the face. I have to deal with it. So somehow you have to change your world so it basically moves you from the bad habit to the good habit. Wrapping up here, we talked about the strategic retirement plan, the 6 objectives. You then supplement that with your personal interests and priorities. Then you build a tactical plan for each one of those strategic retirement objectives. And then you iterate. You constantly are looking back. Is it working? Is the plan working? Should there be changes to it? It's not static. Daniel Gilbert said human beings are work in progress that mistakenly think they're finished. We will change in time. We think we don't, but we do. And your plan has to be flexible in that regard. I've written a couple of articles on my blog about retirement. In my retirement, when I retired, what I did is I created a mantra for me. And my mantra is, it is now my time. And by that I mean when I was working, I had no free time. I had 2 kids. My wife had her own professional career. Between the 2 professional careers, 2 kids, running my medical practice, running my software company, there was just no free time. So when I retired, I decided, okay, now I get to focus on myself. So now, if somebody says, "Will you do such and such?" It's like, well. So my son wanted me to. He lives in Napa, California. He and his wife, and they wanted me to build a birdhouse. So I told him I didn't want to do it, so I wasn't going to do it. I said it's now my time. And he tried everything. He tried making you feel guilty. He tried, it's only going to take you 5 minutes, which is not true. It's going to take longer than that. But he tried everything. Then he and his wife got pregnant. And he said, well, what happens if the baby asks for a birdhouse? I wrote in my diary, if and when the baby asks for a birdhouse, she and I, turns out to be a she and I will build it together. I will give it to her, and she can do with it as she wishes. And so that's where it's left right now. Create a structure, a plan for your retirement, some sort of overall philosophy that's going to work for you. I mentioned before that all my there's a PDF online. That's the URL. All of these slides plus others are there, plus written text. There's also a video online of previous talks that I've given. So that is all I've got for you.